WCLN 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. We're pleased you could be with us today. I want to thank you up front today for all your comments and input related to our last show. Dr. June Atkinson, the State Superintendent of Education. We enjoyed meeting her and bringing her to you and asking her some questions that really impact you. A lot of folks are very interested in education, especially as it relates to funding, and we hope we answered some of those questions and maybe for a bit enlighten some folks on some things that were going on as it relates to the budget and education and all the school systems in the state. So we're kind of changing gears this morning. We're going to talk to an old friend, somebody that we'd love to have come inside and talk to us, Jim Darden. Jim Darden, thank you for being back with us today. We're going to talk about landscaping. And, you know, when you were here last time, we had a fortunate situation in which we had some beautiful azaleas that you brought in. And I can't believe time is going this fast. But that was the spring, early spring. And now we're sitting here and we're into the fall. I guess we could say into the fall, first part of September. There's things changes radically when you start changing seasons and looking at landscaping. And I know folks have mentioned to me that they'd like to see their yards, lawns, outdoor space. All of these terms are, I guess, relate to outdoor. But let's talk about some of the things that we need to think about as we look at our outdoor spaces going into fall. And I want to get into a lot of things. Some of those deal with pruning and those kinds of things. But I'm just going to open that up and let folks know a bit about you before we start, because you have got a wonderful background in education and private business, and a Duke graduate and Methodist University and Sam's Community College. Let's talk about you to start with, so folks that might not know Jim Darden will know you before we get too deep.
Well, let's make that short. Yes, I did go to Methodist and went to Duke. I was very proud of both of those schools. And then I worked with you at the community college for 25 years. Those were really good years, and I look back on them very fondly. And since that time, I had a nursery and garden center, and I decided to go into that business, a nursery, landscaping, irrigation type garden center. So I did that, and very soon after I retired 9 years ago from teaching at the college, I was invited to be the horticulturist over at Methodist University, my old alma mater, and I did that, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. I helped them, I think, turn around that campus a little bit, and also had a job during the recession, so that worked out really well. You know, that was a good thing, but it was really good to go back to a place that you really think of as home, and I certainly do on Methodist College. But we went back and we landscaped virtually every building there, re-landscaped them. Many of them had 25, 30, 40-year-old landscapes, so we did a lot of renovations. We designed and landscaped all of the new buildings. I was the designer and the installer on all of those, and they're building like crazy over there, and really hope to be, I think the goal over there right now is to become like an Elon or a High Point College, one of the major second-tier universities in the state. Academically, I think they're a first-tier university, but when you take the large universities, NC State and Carolina, Wake Forest and Duke out of the picture, then we have some very good smaller colleges. Davidson comes to mind, and Dr. Hancock, the new president over there, has stated his goal that it's going to be one of the best colleges in the eastern part of North Carolina, probably the best. So it was fun to help them get up to speed as far as their aesthetics and their appearance was concerned, and so I was there 8 years and enjoyed it. But now I've retired from that, and I'm a landscaper and a garden center and nursery manager. I run my plant operation, and I'm just having fun being an azalea farmer.
But you'll always be an educator. Once you're an educator, you're always an educator. And part of what you do, and I've in talking with you and talking with folks that you have worked with previously, you really educate folks on landscaping design, which is a whole nother area of focus. And I think it's interesting as we go into the fall season to think about what we need to do and when we need to do it. I've actually seen a number of folks pull up plants around their house and start. It's like I'm thinking, those were big green plants. Why did it pull them up? But it's like they start completely over again. Is that something good to do this time of the year? Or do you wait till another season?
Usually it is. First of all, with regards to time of year, the Nursery Marketing Council has a big banner and a slogan, "Fall is for planting," because it is true. The best time of the year to plant is in the fall. And the reason for that is when you put a new plant in the ground, it has 5 or 6 or 7 months to get the root system established before the heat next year comes into play and begins to put stress on that plant. So really, as far as getting plants to live through the initial year or two after you put them in, this is an excellent time to plant. I think they're exactly right. Fall is for planting. It's without a doubt the best time of year to go about that. And right now, you know, we have a couple of weeks left before September gets here. When September gets here, it's just about exactly 2 weeks. You know, it'll be time to put out the ryegrass and put in the pansies and do the fall landscaping. And so it's here. It really is here. By the time people contact us and get their design work done, their planning work done, it'll be time to put the plants in the ground.
You know, as we're talking today, too, I want to go ahead and give folks your number again. I want to do this several times. It's 590-9689, 590-9689. Now, they can call you, Jim, and from what I've been told and what you have told me, if they call, you will go out and take a look at their situation,
Sure.
give them some ideas, look at possibilities, do some layouts for them, and go to whatever level you need to do prior to actually engaging the job.
Sure.
There's a lot of folks that, you know, when you call them, you're not really sure what you're getting, but they're going to know exactly what they're getting when they look at you. And to couple that, the question would be that a number of the leading articles on fall 2013 in landscaping are talking about the warmer weather that we've been experiencing actually for the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, the winters have been extremely warm, and that's causing people to want to spend more time outside. Not only that, but houses and builders are building houses, and the idea is that most folks want to have at least 1 foot outside the door about all the time. So what does that say to you as a landscaper as you look at a location?
Well, there's a big boom in outdoor living areas, patios, covered decks, the cooking areas outside. The stone cooking areas are very nice. We have a fellow over in Fayetteville who puts those in for us, and he does remarkable work. But people, if the weather is comfortable, people definitely want to get outside and into their landscape, and they want to beautify it, put color there, put flowers there, put ornamentals, all sorts of perennials and woody plants. But they want to get outside in it. They don't want to stay in the air conditioning all the time, particularly this transitional period that we have coming up. It's not too hot, not too cold, but really the last week or two has been beautiful. It's been just right. Except today, we've got a big rainstorm going on today. But
yeah,
that's a good thing too.
You know that, and you mentioned rain. As we've had rain a number of days here recently, and as we look at the rain, it's depleting a lot of the soil values as it relates to nutrients in the soils. Folks are looking at their grass, or they're looking at their shrubbery. What do they need to be thinking about? I mean, like I said, some folks are just completely replanting and starting over. But what do you advise folks to kind of, is there a certain fertilizer, certain thing they need to do? Do they need to do soil sampling? What are the things they need to do?
It's always a good idea to do soil sampling, because then you know exactly what you need to do with your fertility and your pH and that sort of thing. But it's a good idea to go out and take a look and see what you've got, see what the soil situation is. It doesn't really matter if you've used a balanced fertilizer, a quick-acting material like 888 or 10-10-10, or you've used the slow-release materials on your lawn. It doesn't really matter as long as you put the right amount of material out on the soil. Now, we have had a very moist, as you know, very moist summer, spring and summer. It has made the turf grasses and the shrubs, particularly the turf grasses, just grow like crazy. And the good thing about that is there's been no need for irrigation. Up until about 2 weeks ago, there was no need at all for irrigation, but everything has been just lush and beautiful. If there's any downside to that, it would be that it does wash away your fertilizers, particularly those quick-acting fertilizers, very, very quickly. And you might have to fertilize a little bit more. But other than that, it has made all the difference in the world. I know on my street, everybody had just an absolutely spectacular lawn until about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, and all of a sudden it just stopped raining for the first time this year. And it didn't rain, and all of those lawns just got parched and dry as a bone, and they turned brown very quickly. I mean, we went from lots of water for the entire year to no water. that turned around a couple days ago when we started with this rainy cycle that we're in now. But all of those lawns will come back. But you know, when I talk to people about irrigation systems, we put in irrigation systems, and I tell them most of the time you really don't need an irrigation system. Most of the time lawns and shrubs and trees get plenty of water during the year. But there's almost every year there will be, during July and August, there will be a drought period, a 2 or 3 week period, when you've got to get water on the grass because it will dry up and it'll curl and then it'll turn brown, and then some of it actually dies. And that's what the irrigation system is. It's insurance to make sure you don't go through a problem with your grass dying when things get really dry. And you know, even the trees, we've got a river birch in our backyard, and that river birch has lost about half of its leaves. When it gets dry, the first thing that and most trees do with regards to dryness is they drop leaves, so that they stop transpiring, they stop losing water. And of course, once it started raining about a week ago, all of that stopped, and now the leaves are coming back and no more are dropping. But you'll see a lot of trees and a lot of other plants defoliate when it gets really dry. And if you've got an irrigation system, you can certainly circumvent that and keep things lush and green throughout the year.
When you're looking at landscaping, you're looking at irrigation systems in conjunction with that, it's much easier if somebody's building a house to put that irrigation system in then rather than wait, or is it about the same amount of cost?
It can be done at any point in time. The only problem with an existing lawn is that when you trench, of course, you're going to leave about a 6-inch wide gap, and it'll just be soil. Once you cover the pipes back up, there's going to be basic soil there. And that's not a problem because most of our warm season grasses grow so quickly that that'll heal over at least by the end of the growing season, and everything will be just fine. So it doesn't really matter. It's nice to do it when you first build a home. That's excellent, but you really don't know exactly what your landscape is going to look like in most cases at that point. So you might need to wait and see exactly where your lawn patterns are going to be so that you can make sure that when you do put in the irrigation system, it covers the subject completely.
We're going to take a break, Jim. We'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Jim Darden. We're talking about landscaping for the fall, and we're going to be looking at some trends this fall that you need to be thinking about as we move to cooler weather. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air, coming to you on WCLM Radio, Star Vision TV, Star TV, Channel 16, 2:30 to 3:30 on Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I hope you'll take a look at the show. Record us if you're not going to be there. If there's a friend you want to call, if you're listening to a show here on Tuesday, call them and tell them they need to listen in today. We're talking about landscaping, and we're talking with Jim Darden. I want to give a shout out to a number of folks that talk about us quite a bit in a positive way, and some of those is right there at the radio station, Boogie Shoes Radio Network with Robert Stroud. Every Saturday comes on Wayne Weeks with the Southern Gospel Hour, the Morning Crew, Nolan Z, you got Grandpa, and the L Man is always on there in the mornings on WCLN. We'd like to also mention the Fly, Tommy that spins the tunes for us, and always Nicole, who introduces the show each and every week. Jim Darden, thank you for being with us again. We also appreciate you taking your time now that you are a businessman. You've stepped out of the classroom and you're doing things for Darden Nursery. You're also one of the sponsors of our show, and we appreciate that, and appreciate you taking the time at times to pop in and keep us upbeat. It's been some time since we talked to you. One of the things I wanted to kind of get into is some of the trends we're seeing in landscaping and outdoor spaces. The terminologies here has changed quite a bit, but for folks oftentimes that live in the country like I do and others, they may have a little larger space than typically somebody lives in town or what have you. And so how do you, as a landscape designer, when you're working with folks, what do they need to think about when they look at their space and trying to get it down to a manageable size? I know with porches and decks and so forth out in the country, I mean, there's just some beautiful opportunities there, but a lot of us just don't have an eye for it.
Well, the first thing we do is when we're looking at let's say a front yard, is talk to the people about the principles of design. You have simplicity and balance and rhythm and line and focal point and scale and proportion. And those are things which are more psychological than they are physical, but they're things that if you don't accomplish when you're putting in the landscape, when people look at your landscape, then it just doesn't look as good. It just doesn't look soothing and comfortable. One of the most important of those is focal point. If you do have a large outdoor living space, you want to look at the architecture of the house, and usually the architects who have designed the house will have something that catches the eye, and that is the focal point. It's generally the door, the steps, the columns, the porch, or whatever. But in almost every case, that's what the focal point will be. So what you want to do is augment that focal point by putting color plants near it. But a lot of times we'll put annual beds on either side of the focal point, so that when you ride down the road and you look at that house, your eye is drawn to that. You don't want to have competing focal points, or when you look at it, you look back and forth and you really don't see the house. But then we'll come out to the edges of that large space that you're talking about. A lot of times the corners of the house will be sharp edges. They'll be masonry, or they'll be siding, or whatever, and they'll look like, from the street, they'll look like sharp edges, and that's uncomfortable. So what we try to do is put shrubs on those corners that will mask that a little bit. The term is masking that we use. And then you come out a little bit farther, and you might want to use a shade tree that will mask it further. You want to even have trees coming up behind the house that will mask the points where you have sharp edges behind that. And then you move out just a little bit farther, and you hope that there will be trees out on either side. And if you can put figure-8 beds or kidney-shaped beds or any type of mulched beds out there that sort of opens the landscape so it draws the eye of the viewer into the focal point, that's wonderful, and that's what we try to accomplish. And in those beds you can put azaleas, you can put gardenias, you can put just all sorts of different plants that you might happen to like. A lot of people now are putting perennials, love perennials, and we actually use perennials around the focal point sometimes. But you have to be careful when you're looking at these outdoor spaces to be sure that you've addressed those 5 principles of design.
One of the things as you're talking, Jim, that just occurs to me is how important it is to have kind of an objective viewer like yourself, or somebody come in and say, well, look, let's look at this and let's put it on paper. So the number they need to call, if they're thinking, after you've just explained that, if they're thinking, well, maybe I need somebody to come take a look, is 590-9689. 590-9689. Now you'll come out and actually look at it and say, here's some things you might want to take a look at. Here's some things that would be an advantage in talking about focal points and design of the house, that maybe when they've done that if they're trying to do it on their own, they're not going to see these things, because it's not that they're not capable of it, but they just don't have a trained eye to look at it.
That's absolutely true. I'll be happy to come out and give folks a free consultation, and sometimes I'll take one of those focal points or one of those principles of design and say, well, you need to build up the corners, or you need some trees to give some scale and proportion to the landscape, or whatever. And that's free. I'm glad to do that. We do the landscape design, the actual blueprints, for free if we do the job, if we do the installation for people. And there have been instances where people just wanted a design. We do that and just cover the hours that we work. But I'll be happy to come out and talk to anyone who needs landscaping. And landscaping is something you shouldn't neglect, because basically I think NC State says that from 2 to 5% of the value of the house should be in the landscape. In other words, if you don't put at least a little bit in the landscape and have it well proportioned where it should be around the house, you're actually going to lose property value. And you asked earlier about sometimes big plants are there and people are pulling those out. If you have an older house, generally our landscape plants go into decline. They start getting old age, as I am. I won't say anything about you, but as I certainly am. And they'll begin to function a little bit less, and they'll look a little bit more poorly. And sometimes people want to come in and replace one bush, and I tell them, you really need 5 or 6 bushes there, and they're only $12, $15 a piece. They're not terribly expensive in the 3-gallon landscape size. But if you take the great large ones and then put a little one in there, that looks peculiar. And then if one is in decline, the rest are probably going into decline, and they're going to go from reasonable looking to pretty bad looking in the next few years. So what you're going to end up with is a mishmash of different sizes. The best thing to do is pull everything out, start new. It's not going to be very expensive, not going to be much more expensive than putting 1 or 2 in. And just make the whole thing look new and vibrant and pretty, and mulch it well. That's always going to be my suggestion.
And it sounds like in our conversation going in to our discussion a while ago, this September would be kind of the prime month to go ahead and start doing these kinds of things, because we are into the fall of the year. The weather's going to start changing a bit. we're going to start noticing that, and folks can start planning now, and that will give you time to come out, lay out a design for them and say, okay, here's what you need to do, give them time to consider all of those aspects. Now, what if you go out and you do the design and it comes in maybe a bit higher than what somebody wanted to spend? Can you do it in stages, Jim, where people can say, well, look, I want to do this piece or this piece? And the second question of that is, if you look at it in stages, do you do the inner part or the outer part first? What do you recommend on that?
Generally do the visible part, the front of the house first. So yes, you can do it in stages or phases, as we call it. That's not at all unusual. There are two real ways that you can do it. I can either go out and someone can give me a budget. Sometimes people are a little startled. You say, well, how much are you going to spend on this? And they will step back and they think, well, actually we did have a figure in mind, and what I'll do is draw a plan that suits their budget. What I prefer to do is go out and do the entire house and even do a peripheral drawing out on the edges of the property so that the whole property has a plan so that you can follow that along even if you do it in stages, and let them look at the cost of doing that and select the part which they want to or can afford to do at that point in time. So budgeting is not a problem. We just do what people want to, and a lot of times budget is what dictates that.
Well, when you look at it, budgets, you mentioned a while ago that maybe a 2-3% range or what have you. So based on that, and average home 150, 200,000, and maybe even more depending on where you live, or even less, or what have you. So when you look at that, you're looking at anywhere from what, $1,500 up dollars, depending on what's being done.
Right. That's exactly right. As I say, we can hit any budget, but generally, at the low end of that, you're going to get a foundation planting and mulching and maybe grass seeding. Whereas on the high end of that, you might get sodding the yard or larger trees in the yard. It just depends on how much people want to spend. And the end result probably is going to be about the same. It just takes a little bit longer for seeded grasses, for instance, to come out maybe a year or 2 or 3 and look mature like sodding would instantly. But whichever way they want to go, we're happy to work with them.
And Jim, one of the things that, I'm a country boy, grew up in the country, and I think, well, plants, you get a shovel, dig a hole, stick a plant in it, throw some dirt in there, and I'm good to go. Not necessarily the best thing to do. The other thing I've heard you mention before, too, is when you put plants there, you've got kind of an element of maintenance that you do with those plants as well.
That's one thing that some people just don't even think about, and that is once you put in a nice landscape, as soon as the landscaper walks off the site, that's when maintenance begins, and it never ends. You have to take care of your plants. You have to prune them. You have to spray them for insects. You have to make sure that they're happy and watered and fertilized, and it just never stops. So it certainly gives you more property value. If you're selling a house, there's no doubt if you go in and do some landscaping, it will help you sell that house quicker. It'll help you sell it at a higher price. You get your money back 3 to 5 times over generally if you do landscaping to sell a house. But a lot of people don't think that's true, but it absolutely is. So landscaping is something that everyone should think about, and your property value. It really impacts the property value, so you really need to look at that whether you're selling your house or not. Make it look good, and it feels better to you. It looks more soothing to the people that see it from the street, and if you're selling it, it certainly helps you sell it quicker and for more money.
And I think exactly what you're talking about is I was reading an article that talked about high-valued neighborhoods, and one of those points in the high-valued neighborhood is the visual look, the aesthetic look of the neighborhood itself, which lends itself to the landscape, to the shrubbery, to everything around that house, even potted plants.
Absolutely. Even the peripheral plants out on the edges of the landscapes. If you want to have barrier hedges, or if you want to have token hedges or whatever, all of those things come together to make the house more valuable, and the property, you have to think in terms of the entire property more valuable for living in it or for selling it. Doesn't matter.
When you look at these landscapes and you think about value, and again staging that amount of money, you would start out maybe doing a fall, and then the next fall do something else, or you do something else the next spring.
I tell people, and often when we do a fall landscape, anytime between now and the first of the year, or January or February, would be a good time to plant. We'll talk more about it.
Yeah, hold that just a moment. We'll be back in a moment with Jim Darden. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking with Jim Darden. We're talking about landscaping today on We Should Know. I want to remind you, if you would, continue to let us know what your thoughts are, what you think about the show. Many of you are using the email address, weshouldknow, edu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknow.edu@gmail.com. Continue to let us know, and we thank you for your comments. And a huge number of folks will see me out in the community oftentimes, and they say, really enjoyed the show you had with, Dr. Atkinson or whomever we've had on, or Jim Darden, as the case may be today. And we like to know that because we like to keep you informed on what you want to know more about. And it's also not only entertaining, but educational and informational oriented. So again, thank you for listening. And we are talking with Jim Darden. We're talking about landscaping. Jim, before I had to cut you kind of short a while ago as we went to break, we were talking about landscaping in the sense we had discussed doing it kind of in stages, where maybe a person says, well, I don't want to spend $2,000 or $3,000. I want to spend $800 to $1,200, and you were indicating that, well, let's do the inside design, like around the front of the house. If you do that, for example, this fall, do you wait to somebody says, well, let's stage it and do it next fall, do another stage next fall, or can you do another stage in 3 months or 4 months?
I recommend that people do what they're comfortable doing at any point in time, and then sit back and watch that landscape mature and function through the next springtime. And then at that point, people say, well, you can't landscape during the summer. Well, you can landscape during the summer. If you think about it, all of those 40 or 50,000 plants we have out in our nursery are out there during the 9,500 degree heat. It's just that we water them, we take care of them, we fertilize them, we prune them. We're doing all of the maintenance that would be done if they were in a landscape somewhere. When you plant them, and it's the middle of the summer and people say, oh gosh, that's too dry, it's too hot. It really isn't if you do the same things. If you water and you take care of those plants, it doesn't matter. The thing that is good about landscaping early in the year or in the fall is that, as we said before, that root system gets established. The plant is really mature and able to take care of itself when the stress comes the next year because of the droughts and the water problems. So that's the big advantage to landscaping during the fall and winter.
One of the things that's interesting to me as we talk about landscaping too, I know Robert Stroud does a lot of patios and brick work and stone work and those kinds of things. I was reading an article, there's a product out called travertine marble. It's kind of a synthetic marble looking thing. When you're doing landscaping, do you incorporate folks like masons and others like Robert Stroud is and others to come in
Absolutely.
to complement what you're setting out? And oftentimes do they contact you to say, well, look, the homeowner, I'm doing this, and they had some question. Does that work mutually together?
Without a doubt. We actually, even though we do irrigation, sometimes we get folks to come in and do the irrigation for us. I'm a licensed irrigation contractor, but Robert has, for many years, I won't say how many because I don't want to make him look as old as I am.
Yeah, he's still a young man.
He has been the guy for the last 25 years at least, is our go-to guy in Clinton. The problem with Robert is he's so busy because he's so good that it's hard to get him to come out, especially for something small like a garden walk or something like that. But we don't compliment him just because of that great radio program he has on Saturday afternoon. When I'm out working at the nursery, we always have the Boogie Shoes Network on Saturday afternoon. It's great old music. But he is a superb brick mason, and if you can get Robert to come and do the work for you, or any good brick mason, that's great. The guy we work with in Fayetteville, who is such a superb mason, does flagstone walkways, and as we said before, he does cooking areas, grill type areas, all sorts of outdoor living areas as they're called. And we don't do that. That's one of the few things we don't do, but we don't do any of the stonework at my nursery. We do the landscaping, we do the irrigation systems, we do night lighting, we do sodding. We don't do any of the stonework because there are people who are much better at that than we are.
When you look at some of the trends now, one of the trends I was reading was about potted plants, that a lot of times folks are now going, especially in the fall, this fall, going with plants that they're either in small or large pots, and they're placing them in strategic locations around a patio or on a deck and that kind of thing. Do you have those plants available? Do you have to order them? Can you give people advice on how they should stage those based on the way the house looks and what added value it would have to the house?
Sure. You're getting back to the principles of design. If you have a lot of concrete work around the house and you aren't able to put the foundation planting where it should be or put greenery where it should be, then you can use containerized plants. You can use either shrubbery, woody type plants, or you can use tropical plants. And we see people putting, right now, the pompons and the The very heavily pruned spiral type of things are popular, but you have to be careful with them. They make things look awfully tight and formal. So you know, if it's a loose, open, out in the country landscape, you have to be a little bit careful with them. But things like that can be put in containers. You can get the big concrete containers. We get them down at White Lake from Merritt's Pottery. They have some great big 32-inch, 200 or 300 pound containers. I used a number of those over at Methodist, and we put Japanese maples in them and all sorts of plants. But particularly the maples, where we wanted to get on in an area that was completely floored with concrete up near our administration building over there, but we wanted to frame the doorways, putting a green plant on either side of each door. There were 2 sets of doors in front of that building, so we put 4 of those containerized. Actually didn't use the Japanese red maple. We used a green cutleaf weeping type maple called Waterfalls, and it turned out absolutely superbly. We were really pleased with that. So sometimes you do have to put a living area for a plant in a place where there's no access to the ground.
When we talk about maintenance, as you said a while ago, one of the biggest things we look at oftentimes and we don't think about is the maintenance side afterwards. Compare the maintenance with these potted plants, whether it's large pot or small pot, with actually setting a plant out. Which requires more maintenance, and how, as far as longevity, is the longevity far less with a pot as opposed to putting it in the ground?
If it's a woody plant, it should last just as long. I remember we put those plants out 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, those maples. They are weeping, pendulous maples. They just became large, 4 or 5 foot tall and 4 or 5 foot wide green balls with the beautiful cut leaves, and look very nice. But you have to be careful because you don't get any warmth from the ground. You know, if you have plants down in the ground, the roots are protected, whereas if they're up out of the ground in a container, when they freeze during the winter, the roots freeze, whereas in the ground they wouldn't. And anytime a plant is perched up out of the ground, even if it's just planted in an island where you have a curb that raises you up 8 or 10 inches, if it's perched up high, that area is going to dry out quicker than the ground. Plants that are in the ground tend to get water from the ground, whereas perched plants dry out very quickly and do not. So you might have to water a little bit more, but you have to be careful. If you suggest these for people and you put them in for people, you have to advise them that, hey, this might require a little bit more maintenance.
A question always comes up, and folks, I've heard this in conversation and even doing some research on this, people always say, well, there's differing opinions about fruit-bearing plants. If you're doing landscaping, I mean, say you just don't want an orchard or anything, you don't want necessarily an apple orchard, but you want a few fruit-bearing plants in your yard, and I guess I'm one of those people too. I've got an apple tree in my yard, and I ate apples this year, and I mean, I love doing that. Is there plus or minuses to that, and do you recommend it?
The big thing right now is dwarf fruit trees. Dwarf fruit trees are regular fruit trees that are grafted onto a diminutive is the word, a dwarf rootstock. And they just can't get as much water and nutrients up into the plant, so they don't grow as much. But if you have a patio and you want to put a peach tree, I know at my house we've got pecans, we've got blueberries, and maybe a couple of other things. It's certainly neat to be sitting there on your patio and have beautiful peaches hanging, or apples, as you say.
And that's on your, in a pot?
Well, you can't put them in a pot.
Yeah.
You actually can for the first several years, but they will eventually outgrow the pot. If you remember that a plant typically has as big a root system, there's as much wood underground as there is above ground, then if you've got a plant that's 10 feet high and 5 feet wide, and the pot's only a 32-inch pot, obviously it's constrained in the root system. That will hold it back and it won't grow as much, but you got to be careful, because if it gets pot bound, then it'll actually have a negative effect on the longevity of the plant.
And of course, I would imagine these fruit-bearing trees, whether it's a blueberry or whether it's a peach, whether it's apple, whatever, has a certain location that's better that maybe you would recommend if you're looking at the property. And you know, Jim, as we're talking, I think, you know, each one of these things that we've mentioned today, I suspect when we started talking about fruit-bearing trees, well, in fact, I know there's folks that probably turn the radio up or turn the TV up because they want to hear that, you know, because I've had people just say, you know, say something about fruit-bearing trees, and when I started looking it up and looking at some of the research on it, a lot of folks love to have what you just said, that availability of just turning from their chair and, you know, there hangs an apple or a peach. That's really cool to think about.
Adds a lot to an outdoor living space. If you remember that a fruit comes from a flower, and if you remember that plants out in full sun have a lot more flowers, particularly roses. You have to grow roses in full sun, but really think about your apple orchards, your peach orchards. They're all out in full sun to get maximum exposure to the light and get the maximum number of fruit on the plant. And in peach trees, well, in many trees, apples also, in a good year you might get 2 or 3 times as many fruit as you need. So what you do then, do what you need to do to get the maximum fruit set by giving it full sun. But then you go along and with peaches, you'll when the plant or the fruits are about the golf ball size, you go along and you just roll off each one, leaving a fruit about every 6 inches. And if you do that, you'll have as large, juicy peaches or whatever it might be that would be just perfect. If you leave all of the fruit on there and you have 2 or 3 times as many, they'll be half or a third the size, and you won't have the edible fruits that you're looking for.
And depending on where you would put it, if a person said to you, Jim, okay, as you're looking at my property, I enjoy all 3 of the things you just mentioned, which was blueberries, peaches, and apples. Would you put those items in different locations based on what the fruit is, or just wherever they want to put it?
As long as it's in full sun, it doesn't really matter what we do. Again, as we'll go back to the principles of design, then you get into, well, where do we need weight? Is the left side of the property equal to the right side? Do we need to put more plant material on this side than the other side, assuming everything is equal as far as sunlight is concerned? And so then you get into the principles of design, and you try to make it a comfortable, mentally or a comfortable living space for the people to enjoy.
We're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching We Should Know. We're talking with Jim Darden, Darden's Nursery. Excellent background in landscaping, design, and we're going to be talking some more about what you need to know. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're kind of coming up on our last segment here on the show called We Should Know. Again, we thank all of you for listening in. We thank you for your continued comments. And I'm always just surprised at the folks I see in the community. I mean, people that I haven't seen in a long time that mention to me they've seen this show or heard it on WCLN. And some folks will say, hey, I saw the article in the Sampson weekly newspaper, read that, and it's... they were pleased to be able to be informed in a kind of a different way, a little more in-depth on subjects that impact you on a daily basis. And I don't know, Jim, if anything really impacts us much more than what we see when we walk out of our house every day or when we come home every day. And most folks, if they're like me, maybe do that several times during the day. And we don't really think about the value added oftentimes of what we visually see in the landscape around our house. And we were just talking about not only the visual part, but the taste, not only in the sense of the aesthetic taste of what you see, but actually fruit-bearing trees. Before we leave that, I just got a question I want to add to that. For folks that are thinking about, I hadn't thought about putting trees or what have you that bear fruit, how quick, if for example, if a person said, Jim Darden, I want to put 3 apple trees and 3 peach trees and I don't know, maybe 5 blueberry bushes, how quick before fruit will actually be on there? I'm not going to get too much into the age thing as it relates to us, but we don't want to wait 20 or 30 years, do we?
That's right. Don't buy green bananas. I used to teach a course at the college on fruit tree management, and we had to be specific there because we were teaching Sampson County students, and we found that there were basically 5 fruit crops that grow well in this county: strawberries, blueberries, peaches, grapes, and pecans. Those grow just wherever they evolved. We have exactly the same conditions, and they do extremely well. Apples like a colder climate, generally speaking, and they do well in the mountains. They do well up north. There are a few varieties, and I think, I'm trying to think, one of my former students, Francis Zebnick, who lives out on 71, very close to you, as a matter of fact, has, I think it's Arkansas Red. He has an apple that doesn't mind the heat here, doesn't have the cooling requirement that some of the fruit trees have, and it has the great big red apples. Normally, if anything will grow here, it'll be a green apple, but and the red ones don't do well at all, but it all depends on the fruit, and really some fruits have a chilling requirement. They have to live, their buds that are already set in the fall have to live through so many hours under 41 degrees. And they have to be chilled. If they don't get chilled, they don't come out in the spring. You don't have a very good bud set, you don't have very good production. an apple tree that they grow in Florida has virtually no chilling requirement, whereas an apple tree variety that you grow in Maine might require 6 months of chilling. And there again, you have to pick your varieties so that they will do what you want them to do. So apples, if you pick the right varieties, you might get them to work. Certainly peaches, pecans, you know how prolific those trees are. But there's some things, kiwis, and some of the other things, persimmons, the big Japanese persimmons will grow here, but you have to be careful and get the right varieties. If you go out to the Extension Service and ask them to give you their brochure or tell you where on their website to go and look at their brochure, they will have recommendations for fruit trees that grow well in the coastal plain and the Piedmont and the mountains. Blueberries that do so well here. The rabbit eye blueberries that come in, they don't actually come in until late in June and they go right on through early August. They're still bearing. They do extremely well here, whereas the high bush berries grow in the mountains. They like a colder climate. And some people get them to grow here. They will grow here, but they won't produce like a rabbit eye blueberry. So you need to get some experts, and the NC State will give you literature produced by the experts that will tell you what to grow in your locality, and that will certainly make a big difference in how successful you are at growing fruit trees.
And I asked that question because one of the real popular shows on WCLN radio, and I think everybody listens to it, is a Country Store. Don Smith does it every day, and you can listen to Country Store and pick up a lot of information. And maybe the person's listening to, I don't know the person's name, but there's an individual that calls in, and he has all kinds of trees, and you might have heard this, but he had a banana tree. That he had a banana tree for sale, and I thought, well, I want to ask Jim Darden, if somebody buys a banana tree, will it grow bananas in Sampson County?
If it does not freeze, it probably will. I had a fellow who had a banana tree. It was in the ground. It was 4 or 5 feet tall, and he wanted to keep it going to see if it would bear. He was willing to buy a greenhouse for about $1,000, so we built him a 14 by 18 greenhouse around that tree. And sure enough, the next year it grew right on up to about 12 or 15 feet, still didn't bear. And he said he wanted to go another year, so he added to the height of the greenhouse. And the third year it put on a big cluster of little short, almost inedible bananas. I told him that was some of the most expensive bananas I've ever seen anybody grow. But yeah, they will grow here, but you can't let them freeze.
They require a tropical climate to be able to produce.
That's correct. They like the heat, they like the humidity. You have to water them, make sure that they're in a subtropical or a tropical situation, but they can't freeze. A lot of people pull them up, put them under the house, or store them somewhere during the winter, and get them to actually live through that stress and come back the next year, put them back in the ground, and they'll grow out again and be larger the next year. But they're out of their element here, no doubt about it.
Well, everything we've talked about should tell folks clearly that there is a huge science to this process of landscaping and horticulture. Obviously, you've got the background in it. I'm going to give them the number again, 590-9689. Write this down, folks, 590-9689. They can get you most any time. If for some reason you're planning something, you can't reach your phone, they can leave a message and you'll call them right back, 590-9689. Moving forward with that process, I know there's a number of things that you've talked about previously, and we've discussed off air, which deals with color and kind of accentuating various aspects of the property. There's kind of a little cheat sheet here, I guess, that landscapers use that have literally hundreds of plants on it that you were showing me, that folks can go in and actually map the colors they want in different months of the year.
Yes, I have a sheet that I did. I know you can't see it very well, but I'll be happy to send this to you. If anybody wants to email me at jimdarden@embarkmail.com, I'll be happy to send you this sheet. I went up to the New York Botanical Garden and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden a number of years ago, and they had a little triple fold brochure which gave you one plant that gave you January color and one plant that gave you February color, and they went right through the year, but it was only one plant. And I thought, well, that would be helpful. You know, I like to always, when we do a landscape, I like to have an accent of color every season of the year, but I want more than one plant on there for each month, for January, February, March. So I made up this sheet, and it actually has, I think, 125 different Sampson County plants that give you color either from flowers or from leaf color. And it's arranged by month. Here you have January, February, March, April. It works across the page. And what you can do is you can go in and say, all right, what have I got in my landscape? Take a marker, and you can X out or mark out the months when you'll get color from that plant, And then when you get through, you can say, well, okay, I wanted to put a plant over in this bed or up next to the house, but I wanted some color. What should I put? And you can look at, let's say you don't have any color in July. You can look down through July and say, I don't have any color there. Let's look over here and see which plants actually give color during that period. I actually use this during almost every landscape we do, because even people, sometimes they don't even realize it, but we try to give them an accent of color, if not every month of the year, certainly every season of the year. And if you do that, then you always have something exciting going on in the landscape and some beautiful color, and makes a big difference.
And color is important because you can actually set it up for preferred colors for folks. If somebody likes a red or certain color different, you can set them up to have more of those colors during the year.
We have a lot of NC State people in the county who love red.
And yeah.
We have an azalea variety, Wolfpack Red, and I have another one that actually is not a name variety called NC State Red. It's interesting to me that at UNC Chapel Hill, they landscaped around the old well. And I was up there, my wife was a UNC graduate, so we were up there several years ago, and they landscaped all around the old well with Sunglow, which is an NC State variety of azalea. It was developed at NC State and released by NC State. Surely they knew what they were doing, but if they knew, why did they do that? I don't know.
It makes you wonder, if the pack was somewhere in the background making this happen. Who knows? Jim, when we look at the continuing process of landscape, we think about the cost involved, and we've talked about various aspects of landscaping. The big thing now is for folks at this juncture, I guess, of the program today, is to make that decision and say, okay, it's not going to cost me anything if I call Jim Darden at 590-9689 and he answers, and just discuss it with you on the phone. Sure. So the best thing to do is just give you a call, 590-9689, and say, this is what I'm thinking about. Even if they're thinking about fruit trees, give me an idea on fruit trees. Just as you mentioned the Arkansas red apple tree, that's free information. How could you go wrong?
Absolutely. Give me a call. I'll be happy to talk to any of the folks. And one of the common questions we get really up front when we're talking to folks is, how much is it going to cost to landscape this property? And that depends on the budget. We can do a certain amount of work for this amount, and then we can do more work for a greater amount, and it just depends on how much people want to spend. But we always try to hit their budget. We always try to make sure that they're comfortable and feel like they're getting their money's worth, whatever number of dollars they spend. So I'll be happy to come out and talk to some folks. We've got another sheet here, JW. This one was done a long time ago by Parker Seed Company. Some of you remember old John Parker over in Dunn, and that's been out of business for several years now. But this is a sheet that has lots of different types of turf grasses. It tells you how much fertilizer to use, when to use it, what the cutting height should be for different grasses. It's just a really good piece that takes St. Augustine and zoysia and Bermuda and centipede, all of our warm season grasses, and tells you how to grow them. And then it also tells you about the fescue and ryegrass and how to take care of those if you're going to use that cool season grass. So if folks give me a call or give me an email, I'll be glad to send these pieces of information to them.
I'm going to give you about 10 seconds for a wrap up, and then we're going to have to go to close.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I was about to say earlier that you didn't mention Don Smith, and I listen to the Country Story every day on WCLN. And
I got him in at the last time.
I think that's a great program. I think he does a marvelous job with that. So,
thank you, Jim, for being with us today. And, of course, shout out to all those folks at WCLN. And Don is a good friend and been there probably longer than anybody I know in radio. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching We Should Know. We appreciate you being with us. We'll see you next week on the radio.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question or comment regarding this or any episode, please send your email questions and or comments to jwsimmonsedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday afternoon beginning at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.